That's all we're gonna have. We ought to just go to Starbucks.
I thought Adrian told me she was not going to be here last Sunday. She didn't say anything about.
Yeah, her and Gary both weren't here last Sunday. Joy is out this week and the next. So today and then 2 more Sundays. She's on vacation. She brought some friends in last week though. She had 3 other ladies with her.
I saw that walking in online.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool. Having them here, they kind of, the room didn't look empty without you and Adrian and Gary, but yeah, I'm not sure. But it is summertime. People doing lots of stuff. I know the van's out back Sean got the van yesterday for taking the youth to camp, to Passport. So lots of stuff going on. So we'll probably see weird attendance for the summer. I think it's kind of typical anyway.
Yeah.
I'll wait till 10. I think that's when it starts streaming. I'm not real sure.
So my mom might be coming to the service today.
Cool. I don't think have I ever seen your mom here? That's great.
I was like, cool.
Hopefully she likes it. Hopefully she enjoys it.
I mean, it's been hit or miss because she said she wanted us to do lunch today, like after church. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
cool. That's fair. And then I think it was Tuesday. She said something about actually coming. I'm like, cool, okay. You don't have to go. I told her, I was like, I get here early. You don't have to get here like
Yeah.
me,
Right.
I was like, you don't have to go to Sunday school if you don't want to. Like.
Yeah.
And then she said something about coming a different time. And then yesterday she was like, I'm like, okay, cool.
That's great.
Whatever. Like.
That's good stuff.
I was like, you can be late if you want to. That's cool too.
Make it as easy as possible, right? Don't put no burdens, no obligations. Just hoping people come. I know I'm the same way. Whenever I invite people to church, I want them. It seems some people get anxiety about it. Not just church in general, but just going new places, new people. So you always want to lift that burden as much as you can. All right, so I'll go over the announcements. We have a potluck dinner and special business meeting coming up on June the 29th. That's a Wednesday. And so there's going to be a potluck dinner followed by a special business meeting to vote on the new fiscal year budget for the church. Begins at 5:30. That's when the food begins, 5:30. And then around 6 or so, kick off the business meeting is typically how it goes. Can you help out on Wednesday nights? Okay, I'm just going to read this because I'm not really familiar. The kids are taking on a challenge to study the book of Mark. And to make this happen, we need 2 volunteers for each of the 6 Wednesdays that this is going to happen over the summer. You'll be given a passage to read together with the group, then answer the 4 questions. What happened? What questions do you have? What does this teach you about Jesus? And what does it mean for me? And then there's going to be some scheduled fun time that will take place after the Bible lesson. And so to sign up, please call or text or email Hannah Simic with the dates. So any of these 6 Wednesdays of the summer, let her know what Wednesday would work for you, and what kind of an activity you would be comfortable leading. And it says you can host as many as you like. So if you want to do this full time for the duration, that'd be great. I'm sure that'd be appreciated. And any supplies or anything like that you would need to do your activity, that sort of thing, any of those supplies will be provided by the church. Anyway, so trying to lighten the burden of anyone who is willing to do this. Please just let Hannah know and show up, and everything else, will be taken care of by the church. Background checks are necessary for working with kids. So if this was something that you would be doing for the first time, or as far as working with the kids, you would need a background check. But it's a really quick process and pretty simple to do. So don't let that get in your way. Hey, Mike.
Morning.
And so the dates in particular are June 29th. So these are Wednesdays again. Then July 6th, the 13th, the 20th, and the 27th. That's 5 Wednesdays, but, I thought there were 6. Anyway, the themes for these activities are outside water play. There's a board game called Mastermind. That's one of the other themes. There's an obstacle course, and then there's an art day. And it says, we'll be providing instruction on copying and painting in that. And then there's a wheels day. Bring a bike, scooter, skates, something like that to ride around in the parking lot. And skates might be kind of hard to ride around in the parking lot, just saying. Summer school supply drive. We have a new need this summer, and it's the need is school supplies. So from June 19th until, that's today. So from today until July 17th, the youth will be hosting a school supply collection, and we'll be distributing the supplies to organizations in the area to help support students and teachers and those folks who are in need of these supplies for the upcoming school year. And it says here it's got a list of the organizations that will be helping this year. It's the Appalachian Ministries of the Smokies, AMOS. That's a pretty cool little acronym. Formerly Appalachian Outreach. There's also the Olive Branch Ministries, then the Secret City Academy, and Agape, which is actually here at the church. And they need backpacks, pencil boxes, red ink pens, girls' backpacks, and it says in small, large, or high school size. So they need all the sizes. Binders from 1.5 inch all the way up to 3 inch, anything there, and college ruled paper. And also appreciated and needed outside of school supplies would be items like personal hygiene items, like feminine products, also socks, underwear, things like that, deodorant, and that sort of thing. So pretty wide array of things that we can use here. So. Anything that can be donated is very much appreciated, and I know the folks who are receiving them will be very thankful. The July fellowship table is going to be Friday on July 8th from noon to 1 in the fellowship hall. As usual, anyone in the community is invited to come. Tickets will be on sale the Sunday before in the narthex. They're $5 a piece, so you can get tickets down in the lobby in the narthex the Sunday before. And they like for them to be purchased in advance. That way Jan and team knows how many they're preparing for. But if you can't pay in advance, and you can always pay the day of or something like that. They welcome as many people as they possibly can to these things, and the food is delicious. It says the main entree will be barbecue country ribs. Man, that just sounds good. That makes me hungry right now. So. Be there as early as 11:30 just for fellowship, and maybe you'll even get to eat some food a little early. And it's a good time. It's a good thing. If you have any questions or need any information, just contact Jan Stoutland, and she's got some information here in the bulletin how to reach her. All right, that's all we have for the announcements. So let's say a prayer, and then we'll begin with Sunday school. Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for bringing us together again, and we just thank you for the good weather, and we just ask that you would use this time to help us to grow closer to you, to learn more about you, to grow stronger in our faith, and be better equipped to share our faith with others, and to interact with others and evangelize and that sort of thing. And we just pray that you'd be with all of our services today, and that you would accept our worship, and that you would help us to take these things out into the world and use them for your kingdom and your glory. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so last week we're looking at these arguments for the existence of God, from natural theology, which is that branch of Christian theology where we look for, we look for evidence of God and arguments for God just by considering the natural world, the natural order of the cosmos, and without appealing to, special revelation like the Bible or religious texts or anything like that. And so we've talked about a few, and today we're going to talk about what's called the teleological argument. Teleology is just a branch of study that's concerned with a thing's purpose. What purpose does it have? And so the teleological for God's existence is also known as the design argument. We look at the universe, we consider how it's ordered and how it's appears to be very much fine-tuned for the existence of life. It is a life-permitting universe. And so this is also the teleological argument. You may have heard it called the argument from fine-tuning. So astronomers have recognized, how complex and how delicately balanced the initial conditions had to have been or were at the moment of the Big Bang, in order for the universe to permit the existence of intelligent life anywhere at all within the universe. And so this delicate balance of initial conditions has come to be known as the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life. And what we've, through science and scientific discovery, what astronomers and physicists and others have come to realize is that the universe is just incomprehensibly fine-tuned for the existence of intelligent life. And as I mentioned last week, it's important to recognize that fine-tuned, that term itself, does not mean designed. The fine-tuning is really just a neutral expression doesn't say anything about how the fine-tuning is to be explained, only that it just looks like the universe is very much fine-tuned for the existence of life. And so in this neutral sense, the universe's fine-tuning is fairly non-controversial or uncontroversial and well established. So it's merely the recognition of how the laws of nature that govern our universe, they fall within this very, very narrow range of a wide range of possibilities. And this narrow range has allowed for this very particular outcome, which is us, intelligent life. So that's what's being referred to with the term fine-tuning. As one physicist put it, the fine-tuning of the universe for life is the realization that if the laws of physics were different, even just by a little bit, life would not exist. So what modern scientists have discovered is that if any one of the constants and quantities of the forces of nature, the laws of nature had been different, even in the slightest, a different sort of universe would have evolved and would very likely not support life at all. So let's look at some examples of fine-tuning. And what we're going to do is I'm going to start with some numbers that will kind of help us get a feel for how delicate the fine-tuning of our universe really is. And these numbers are ridiculous. They're kind of incomprehensible. But so, for example, the number of seconds, and you can find this online, interestingly enough, the number of seconds in the history of the entire universe, all the way, since the Big Bang, is said to be 10 to the power of 17. So that's a 1 followed by 17 zeros. Similarly, the number of stars in the observable universe is roughly estimated at 10 to the power of 22. So again, these are incomprehensible numbers. They're just enormous in their scale. We can't really imagine the scale of numbers like this. But now with these numbers in mind, consider the following. If the value of the force of gravity were to be altered by just, 1 part out of 10 to the power of 100, our universe would not be life permitting. This universe, that gravity being off by that small amount would not permit life as we know it in our universe. Similarly, and we talked about how the universe is expanding in a previous Sunday school lesson. If the acceleration at which the universe is expanding were to be off even by 1 part out of 10 to the power of 120, the universe would not be life permitting. So, these numbers are just incredibly, unimaginably tuned, basically, these values for gravity and for the expansion of our universe. They are incredibly, fine-tuned to allow for the existence of life. So the fine-tuning that we're talking about here is really beyond human comprehension. And it's not that each of these constants and these quantities need to be finely tuned themselves. They also have to be, when you take them all together and multiply them together and they work in unison, that has to be fine-tuned. They all have to fall into this narrow life-permitting range. And so again, it's just really incomprehensible. And so that's what we're talking about with fine-tuning. It's also important to point out that when scientists talk about a life-permitting universe, they're talking, when they use the term life-permitting, they're talking about not just us as complex as human beings, but any organism that have the ability to draw energy from its environment, put that energy to use, adapt to the environment, and then reproduce. So anything that fits that description counts as life in this case. This is important because for life so defined to be possible, whatever form it might take, again, those constants and quantities of the forces of nature have to be incomprehensibly fine-tuned. And so in the absence of fine-tuning, not even matter, not even chemistry would exist, much less stars and planets and things like that where life might evolve. So it really is just kind of incomprehensible. So, now someone might object and say, they might object to these conclusions from fine-tuning by saying that, well, maybe a universe that is governed by different laws of nature, would not have, such disastrous consequences for life if those values were altered by a little bit. But this objection really just betrays a misunderstanding of the argument. There's no way for scientists or any of us to concern ourselves with a universe that operates according to different laws of nature that are different from our own. You just have no idea. How could we possibly know what would happen in such a universe? So rather, the argument from fine-tuning is concerned with universes that operate according to the same, laws of nature as ours, but with different values for those constants and quantities for those forces of nature, like we discussed, like gravity or electromagnetic force, that sort of thing. And so only by considering the laws of nature of our universe and then tinkering with those values, altering those values that are found in our universe, can we predict, what would happen if those values were altered in one way or another. And what we see is that it's more likely than not that just, to just alter them just the smallest bit, as you can see with those numbers, would have prevented life as we know it. So our concern is with looking at the potential for life in universes governed by the same laws of nature that we have in our universe, but with different values for those constants and those quantities. And what we find is that a life-permitting universe such as our own is just incomprehensibly improbable when we begin tinkering with those values. So the question that arises is, what is the best explanation for this fine-tuning that we observe in the universe? And there's basically 3 alternatives that have been put forward. Is our universe fine-tuned due to physical necessity, or is it due to chance, or is it due to design? Those are the 3 options for explaining the fine-tuning. There's been no other options have been put forward. If you want to put forward a 4th one, you'd have to figure out what that would be. But those are the 3. And so if we're to think, that design is the best explanation, then we have to eliminate those other 2 alternatives, necessity, physical necessity, and chance. And so if you were to put this into a simple form of argument like we have for the, the previous arguments that we've looked at, the argument would go like this. Premise 1, the fine-tuning of the universe is due either to physical necessity, chance, or design. Premise 2, it is not due to physical necessity or chance. Therefore, it is due to design. That would be the argument for design from the fine-tuning of the universe. So from there, you have to show that the truth of those two premises is more plausibly true than not, just as we have with the other arguments. Premise 1, again, as I said, it's really unobjectionable just because it lists the alternatives that we have for that are available for explaining fine-tuning. And as of yet, no one has come up with a fourth alternative. So these are uncontroversial, unobjectionable. And so these are the three, alternatives that we have to deal with. So the real question, the real, linchpin of this argument is premise 2. Is it more plausibly true than not that the fine-tuning of the universe is not due to physical necessity or, chance or design? So if we look at physical necessity, this entails that the existence of of a life prohibiting universe is impossible. That means our universe simply must be the way it is. It must be life permitting for whatever reason. Well, not for whatever reason, but just due to physical necessity. Our universe simply must exist. That probably sounds hard to fathom. And so the problem with this view is that there's really just nothing about the constants and the quantities, those values for the forces of nature in our universe that are determined by anything in the universe. There's no evidence for that. They just are what they are. They almost seem to be arbitrary if you don't go any further than what you see and don't infer like a designer or anything. These constants and quantities of these forces just are what they are, and they happen to be life permitting. So there's no evidence that these things are necessary. Anyone who would support this view would need to put forward some sort of evidence to suggest that they are necessary, but there just isn't any evidence. No one's discovered or put forward any that I'm aware of. So the idea that our universe exists or is physically necessary is more plausibly false than it is true. We just don't have any good reasons for thinking that our universe exists out of due to physical necessity. So that brings us to the second alternative, which is chance. Now, chance, I think, would be much more plausible than physical necessity. So could the fine-tuning of the universe just be the result of chance? And according to this, alternative, it's just an accident that all the constants and the quantities are the values that they fall into this extremely narrow life-permitting range. And so we basically just lucked out, and we're able to exist just due to pure chance, due to luck. So the fundamental problem with this alternative is that, and we've talked about this before, the chances of a life-permitting universe are just so much more unlikely than a life-prohibiting universe. And so so much so that this alternative of chance really just becomes improbable, unreasonable even. Now, someone might object to the appeal to, someone might, object to the saying that chance is, unreasonable by saying they might appeal to the example of a lottery, let's say, in order to justify this alternative of chance. So in a lottery, obviously it's incredibly improbable that any one person should win, right? We all know this. But somebody has to win. If all the tickets are sold and at least one of those tickets, is a winning ticket, then someone has to win. But that person's chance of winning, is so improbable that they're probably not going to assume that the lottery was rigged so that they would win. If I were to go buy a lottery ticket today and I win the next time, the numbers are drawn, I am not going to think at all that somebody designed that lottery so that I personally would win, because I just know how improbable the chances are that I would win. So in the same way, someone might argue that since the winner of the lottery, the winning lottery ticket is unjustified in thinking the system was designed for that person to win. So we are also unjustified to think that the universe was, let's say, we consider ourselves in this example, we're the winners of a universe lottery. We just got so lucky that there's this universe that allows for our existence. And with this example of the lottery, we'd be unjustified in saying that this has to be the result of design, just as I wouldn't argue that it was the result of design that I won a lottery ticket rather than chance. Chance seems to be the winner there. So all of the possible universes are equally improbable, and yet some universe had to exist. So why think it more probable that that it exists as a result of design rather than chance? That's the question. The problem with this argument is that it misunderstands the argument for design from fine-tuning. The argument for design from fine-tuning is not trying to explain why this particular universe exists. Rather, it's trying to explain why a life-permitting universe exists. As we talked about, this universe didn't have to be life-permitting. It just happens to be. So why, the argument really is, why is it a life-permitting universe that exists? So a better analogy or a better example would be a lottery where even though some ticket has the matching numbers and someone has to choose it, someone's going to win it. But in order to win, the person who wins the ticket with the matching numbers, in order for them to actually win the lottery, that person has to be, they have to be me. They have to be a 44-year-old male, 180 pounds, 5'10", blue eyes, who has a bullet lodged in their, the muscle tissue of his lower back. I just bring that out because I actually have a bullet lodged in my lower back, but that's not typical. That's pretty improbable that someone would meet those features. And so it would be more like a lottery where that particular person has to also get the matching numbers in order for them to win. And so if every time the person who won the lottery met that description, wouldn't you start to think, okay, we're not dealing with chance here. We're probably dealing with some sort of design. The system is rigged or designed. That's actually a better analogy. So it's not why our universe exists, but why it is life permitting. And the chance of this happening is just so utterly improbable that it becomes more plausible that we're dealing with a rigged outcome. But even if the chance alternative is just ridiculously improbable, does that mean that design is a better explanation? So if we're going to abandon the chance alternative for the design alternative, design needs to offer a better explanation. It needs to be more plausible than its chance, the chance alternative. It needs to be more probable if it's going to offer an advantage over the other alternatives of chance or physical necessity. And so the question is, does design offer a better explanation? And so we'll take a look at that. We'll start by asking really what objection might be raised, against the view that there is an intelligent designer of the universe who fine-tuned it to be life permitting. So really we're just going to talk about one objection, but it's probably the most popular one that I'm aware of that gets brought up just in conversation. And this objection was raised by the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins in his book that's titled The God Delusion. In the book, Dawkins objects that if you're going to propose a cosmic designer as an explanation for the universe, then you need to have an explanation for the designer as well. And so he basically says, if there's a designer, in other words, if there's a designer of the universe, well, who designed the designer? You may have heard that it put another way, well, if God made the world, then who made God? That sort of thing. But this argument is severely flawed. In order to recognize an explanation as the best explanation, You do not need an explanation for the explanation. For example, imagine some archaeologists who are out somewhere in the world digging in the ground, and they come across things like that look like pottery shards, arrowheads, that sort of thing. They would be justified inferring that these were artifacts left by some other group of people, right, or some persons, rather than the products of natural occurrences like sedimentation, metamorphosis, and that sort of thing that we find in the ground. So even if they had no idea or no explanation for who these people were, they would be much more justified in saying, okay, this was left behind by people. This isn't a natural occurrence of things forming in under the dirt. Or similarly, if you had astronauts who discovered a spacecraft had crash landed on the dark side of the Earth's moon, like they did in that Transformers movie. If the astronauts find this spacecraft on the backside of the moon, wouldn't the astronauts be justified in assuming that the wreckage was left there by some sort of intelligent life, even if they had no idea who they were or where they came from or how they got to the moon, rather than that wreckage just being some sort of natural occurrence on the moon itself? Yes. So, in order to recognize an explanation as the best explanation, you do not need an explanation for the explanation. So don't ever let anyone put you into that position or feel like you've been defeated, because that's just not a requirement. If that were the case, nothing would ever get explained. Since before you could accept any explanation for something, you'd need an explanation for the explanation. And then you'd need an explanation for the explanation's explanation. And it would just, so on and so forth into infinity. Nothing would ever get explained. It would be impossible. So, recognize, even science couldn't even get off the ground if that were a requirement. So, recognizing a designer of the universe as the best explanation for the universe does not require an explanation for the designer. Now, that can definitely be a question to be probed and a curiosity, but it's a totally separate question that's open-ended and is there for inquiry if for folks who would like to think about how to explain the designer. So this argument, Dawkins' argument, is not a good one. It's just not. So it's actually a very bad one, and it shouldn't ever trip anyone up in making the case for a designer of the universe as the best explanation for the universe. So that's all I'm going to talk about today. That really concludes our talk on the fine-tuning argument, unless you guys have any questions. And so, but just to conclude, given the evidence that we have and considering the alternatives for explaining the fine-tuning that we observe in the universe, it does seem to me that the most plausible answer is that the universe, that it was designed that way, that this fine-tuning is by design, and so it has a designer. And if that's true, then it gives us, just another argument for the existence of God. Next week, we're going to talk about a new argument. We're going to move on to what's personally my favorite argument, which is the moral argument. Where do objective moral value? First of all, do objective moral values and duties exist? I think most people recognize that they do. Not even that, but what is good? Is goodness a real thing? Is that something to be, is that something that actually exists? And if so, where do these things come from? That's what the moral argument really gets into. So that's what we'll pick up with next week. Any questions or topics of discussion?
I was wondering if you could share your your sources for the the values of how little the values of certain constants would have to change to change the sort of life permitting nature of the universe. I'd be curious to read more about those.
Yeah, so I actually mentioned this last week. There's a really good book, and this is the only book that I own that dives into this topic. Actually, that's not true. I've got another kind of a reference book, but the book that I have benefited from, that I enjoyed reading because it brought physics down to a layman's, where I could understand it. It's called A Fortunate Universe. there's like a subheading, Life in a Finely Tuned Universe. So anyway, it's called A Fortunate Universe. Its authors are Luke Barnes and Geraint Lewis, and those are both they are both physicists, astrophysicists, I believe, out of the University of Sydney. And I have that book if you'd ever like to borrow it. That doesn't have all of the numbers that I spit out. I found the age of the universe in seconds on a website, and I don't actually. It's in.
You could probably Google that.
Well, you can, but it took me a minute to track it down. These numbers were also given by William Lane Craig in his Sunday school,
Okay.
but I like to find. He didn't. There's no there's no references because these are like YouTube videos and transcripts and stuff. So I don't like to take the stuff. I trust him as a source, but I like to have an actual source. So the website is physicsoftheuniverse.com, and that you can find this table of like it's got the expansion of the universe and the countdown, or it's got the countdown from when we believe the Big Bang was 14 point such and such billion years ago. And it's got the countdown in seconds, well, it's not really a countdown, but the number of seconds to the power and all that of how long that would be. And so those numbers really just give you an idea of how just incredible, the scale of them. And then, so between those couple of things, couple of websites, and then that book, you can find most of this information.
Cool. Probably try to listen to that book.
Yeah, it's good. And there's plenty of other books that discuss fine tuning, and they're going to reference the original scientists and stuff who did some of the calculations, people like Roger Penrose and that sort of thing. But yeah, that's a good one that I'm aware of because when I first learned of it, I bought it because I had never really read much about fine tuning, and I'm not that great with science. And that book brought both of them together really well. And that book does not try to make a case. Again, it's not making a case for a designer. It's just really explaining this idea of the fine tuning that we observe in the universe for permitting life. So it's a really cool book.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that both the numbers you mentioned, even as astronomically large as they are, they're still smaller than Avogadro's number. They're still smaller than the number of atoms in a mole of any given material.
Yeah, there's ridiculous numbers. There's some numbers out there that are like 10 to the 100 and then in parentheses 120 next to it. So I mean that's because that's 10, so that's just think of that. I mean that's just I don't know how you say to the power of 100 times 100. Basically, I guess that's to
is that sometimes when it's in parentheses that's trying to tell you the the margin of error, sort of the uncertainty. So that
could be. I was just looking at some of them.
It could be as much as 120.
And that could be what that was saying. It could be margin of error. See, I don't know that stuff right off the top of my head. I was looking at some of these, but like you say though, there's numbers out there that are even more incomprehensible than those. It's just that even those, even though some in the lower range it's ridiculous. But yeah. Any others? Anything else? All right. Well, it's about time to move towards the worship service anyway, so I'll see you guys there.